On my first day in the office, my overbearing mother-in-law handed me a mop and ordered me to clean the floor. I refused because I had been appointed as a personal advisor, not a cleaner. She became angry and demanded, "Why don't you obey my orders?" Furious, she threw hot coffee on me, burning my hand and face. I was in pain and crying. To my shock, my husband sided with her and kicked me out of the house. An hour later, I returned with my brother and gave them a shocking surprise they could never have imagined. I still remember the day I first met Liam. It was during our second year in college, and we were both finance majors. Liam was charming, with an easy smile and an ambition that matched my own. We started as study partners, then friends, and soon enough, we were inseparable. By the time we graduated, we were deeply in love, and marriage felt like the natural next step. After graduation, I had dreams of making a mark in the world of finance, but Liam's family was rooted in tradition. His mother, Caroline, was an imposing woman who seemed to have a strong hold over every aspect of Liam's life. She ran their family business in Chicago and had made it clear from the beginning that she valued control and loyalty above all else. When Liam proposed, I was thrilled. We moved to Chicago shortly after, and I was hopeful for a fresh start, a life of love and mutual respect. Initially, things seemed wonderful. Liam was attentive, and Caroline, while stern, was cordial enough. But as the days turned into weeks, the cracks began to show. Caroline had a way of making me feel small, without saying much. She would comment on everything, from the way I dressed to how I cooked, always with a thinly veiled criticism. "Oh, Barbara, you're so modern," she'd say with a laugh, as if it were a flaw. I brushed it off at first, telling myself that adjusting to a new family takes time. But it wasn't just her words. It was her actions. She'd rearrange the kitchen after I had organized it or redo tasks I had completed, as if to say I wasn't good enough. Liam, unfortunately, did little to intervene. "She's just like that," he would say, shrugging off her behavior as unchangeable. Still, I held on to hope. I thought if I could prove my worth, things would get better. I decided to approach Liam about joining their family business. With my finance degree and fresh perspective, I believed I could contribute meaningfully. Liam was hesitant at first. "You know how my mom is," he said. "She likes to keep things traditional." "Liam, I just want to help," I replied. "I want to be part of this family in every way." Eventually, he agreed. "Fine," he said, though his tone didn't sound entirely supportive. "I'll talk to her." The morning of my first day at the office, I dressed carefully, wanting to make a good impression. I arrived with excitement, ready to prove myself. But when I walked into the office, Caroline's face froze. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone sharp. "I've joined the business," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Oh, really? And what do you think you'll be doing here?" Before I could answer, she continued, "You can start by cleaning the office. There's a mop in the closet. You'll find it soon enough." I was stunned. "That's not my job," I said firmly. "I'm here to work in finance, not as a cleaner." Her face darkened. Without warning, she grabbed a cup of hot coffee from her desk and hurled it at me. The liquid scalded my hand and soaked my blouse. I gasped in pain, staring at her in disbelief. "Now clean this up," she said with a sneer. Liam, who had been standing nearby, said nothing. He just looked away, as if he couldn't be bothered. That moment broke something in me. The humiliation, the pain, and Liam's silence, it was too much to bear. I left the office, tears streaming down my face, my heart heavy with betrayal. That night, I packed my things and called my brother, Ethan, who lived in New York City. He was my anchor, the one person who had always believed in me. "Ethan," I said, my voice trembling, "I need your help. I can't stay here anymore." "Barbara, what happened?" he asked, his tone filled with concern. I told him everything, the insults, the coffee, Liam's indifference. By the end, I could hear the anger in his voice. "Come to New York," he said. "You don't have to deal with this alone." And just like that, I knew what I had to do. The life I had dreamed of with Liam was gone, replaced by a reality I could no longer ignore. My love for him had been overshadowed by his silence and Caroline's cruelty. It was time to leave and start anew. As I boarded the train to New York, I felt a mix of emotions: sadness for what I had lost, anger for how I had been treated, and a quiet determination to rebuild my life. What I didn't know was that this journey would lead me to uncover secrets that would change everything. Leaving Chicago felt like shedding a heavy weight. When I arrived in New York City, Ethan was waiting for me at the station. His warm hug and reassuring smile were exactly what I needed. Ethan had always been my rock, calm, wise, and fiercely protective. "Barbara," he said gently as we sat down in his apartment later that evening, "I'm glad you're here. But we need to talk about what happened." I recounted everything: Caroline's insults, the coffee incident, and Liam's complete lack of support. As I spoke, Ethan's expression shifted from concern to anger. "She had no right to treat you that way," he said firmly. "And Liam, he should have stood by you." "I know," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "But it's not just about the humiliation. There's something else, Ethan. I can feel it. The way Caroline runs the business, the way Liam avoids discussing it. It doesn't add up." Ethan leaned forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "What are you saying?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I want to find out. I want to know the truth about them, about the business. If they're hiding something, I need to expose it." Ethan nodded. "Then we'll start digging. But we need to be smart about this. If they're involved in something illegal, it could be dangerous." Over the next few days, Ethan and I came up with a plan. He suggested hiring a private investigator, someone who could look into Liam and Caroline's financial dealings. I agreed, knowing that I wouldn't be able to uncover much on my own. The investigator, a sharp and discreet man named Robert, agreed to take the case. "I'll need some time," he said. "But if there's anything suspicious, I'll find it." While Robert began his work, I decided to focus on my own research. Using the skills I'd honed during my finance degree, I started analyzing public records, financial statements, and anything else I could get my hands on. It wasn't easy. Caroline and Liam were careful to keep their dealings private, but I found small discrepancies, subtle signs that something wasn't right. Ethan was my constant support, guiding me through the legal aspects and keeping me grounded when the frustration became overwhelming. "Barbara," he said one evening, "you're doing the right thing. Don't let them intimidate you." Weeks passed, and then Robert called. "Barbara," he said, his voice serious, "we need to meet. I've found something you'll want to see." When Ethan and I met Robert at his office, he laid out the evidence he'd gathered. Bank statements, offshore accounts, falsified invoices, it was all there. The numbers didn't lie. Caroline and Liam were involved in massive financial fraud. They had been embezzling funds, laundering money through shell companies, and evading taxes for years. As I stared at the evidence, a mix of emotions washed over me. Anger at their deceit, sadness for what could have been, and determination to bring them to justice. "There's more," Robert said, interrupting my thoughts. "It seems Caroline had plans to pin the financial irregularities on you, Barbara. She's already started creating a paper trail to make it look like you were involved." My heart sank. The humiliation, the coffee, the insults, they weren't just acts of cruelty. They were part of a calculated plan to frame me. Ethan placed a hand on my shoulder. "We won't let that happen," he said firmly. "We'll fight this." The next few days were a blur of activity. Ethan and I worked closely with Robert, compiling the evidence into a comprehensive case. I used my finance expertise to trace the flow of money, creating detailed reports that would be impossible to refute. As we prepared to take the case to the authorities, I couldn't help but think about Liam. How much had he known? Was he as deeply involved as Caroline, or had he been manipulated too? The thought of him standing by silently while his mother plotted against me filled me with a sense of betrayal I couldn't shake. One evening, as Ethan and I reviewed the final pieces of evidence, he looked at me and said, "Barbara, are you ready for this? Once we go to the authorities, there's no turning back." I took a deep breath, the weight of everything settling on my shoulders. "I'm ready," I said. "They've taken enough from me. It's time to fight back." The following morning, we submitted the evidence to the federal authorities. It was a nerve-wracking experience, but I felt a sense of relief knowing that the truth was finally coming to light. As we left the federal office, Ethan turned to me. "This isn't over yet," he said. "But you've already won, Barbara. You stood up for yourself. That takes courage." His words stayed with me as we walked away. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. The battle wasn't over, but I was no longer the helpless victim. I was in control of my story now, and I wasn't going to let Caroline and Liam take that away from me. What I didn't know was that the fight was about to get even more intense, and the secrets we uncovered would shake me to my core. When I decided to take the evidence to the authorities, I thought the hardest part was behind me. But I was wrong. What came next was a whirlwind of revelations, confrontations, and emotions I wasn't prepared for. A few days after submitting the evidence, Ethan and I were contacted by the federal investigators. They needed us to clarify some details and provide context for the documents we'd shared. I sat across from the agents in a sterile, dimly lit room, answering their questions with as much clarity and composure as I could muster. "This is a strong case," one of the agents said, sliding the evidence across the table. "But we'll need your testimony to solidify it. Are you willing to do that?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I'll do whatever it takes to make sure they face justice." While the investigation progressed, the authorities began surveilling Caroline and Liam's business activities. Ethan and I were warned to keep everything confidential. "Don't let them suspect anything," one of the agents had said. "We need the element of surprise." It wasn't easy to act as if nothing had changed. Caroline and Liam tried to reach out to me, likely to gauge whether I was still a threat. Liam left several voicemails, his tone switching between guilt and anger. "Barbara, you can't just walk away like this," one message said. "Come home, and let's talk." But I knew better. His words were hollow. He had stood by while his mother humiliated me and plotted to destroy me. There was nothing left to say. Then one evening, something unexpected happened. Robert, our investigator, called with a critical update. "Barbara," he said, his voice urgent, "I've uncovered something bigger. You need to hear this in person." Ethan and I met Robert the next morning at his office. He looked more serious than usual, which made my stomach churn. "Barbara, it turns out the fraud isn't just about money laundering and embezzlement," Robert began. "They've been involved in smuggling, too. We found evidence linking them to an international ring." My mind raced. Smuggling? That was far beyond what I had imagined. Robert handed me a folder. Inside were detailed reports and photographs, transactions for illicit goods, correspondence with shadowy international contacts, and shipment manifests that pointed to illegal activity. "It's not just Caroline and Liam," Robert continued. "They have partners in this. Powerful ones. That's why they've been untouchable for so long." I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just about exposing them, it was about dismantling an entire network of corruption. As the gravity of the situation sank in, I realized how dangerous this had become. But I couldn't back down now. "What happens next?" I asked Ethan. "We take this to the investigators," he said firmly. "But we need to be careful. If Caroline or Liam suspects anything, they might try to retaliate." The following weeks were some of the most nerve-wracking of my life. Federal agents began preparing for a raid on Caroline and Liam's business, gathering the final pieces of evidence. I was kept in the loop but warned to stay low. It was during this time that Liam made one last attempt to manipulate me. He showed up at Ethan's apartment unannounced. I opened the door and froze when I saw him standing there, his face a mixture of desperation and anger. "Barbara," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "You don't understand," he said, his tone softening. "My mother, she's not as bad as you think. She's just protective. She didn't mean to hurt you." I stared at him, disbelief and anger swirling within me. "Not as bad as I think." I shot back. "She threw coffee at me. She humiliated me. And she's trying to frame me for crimes she committed." Liam looked away, his jaw tightening. "I didn't know about that," he admitted. "But you can't let this go any further. You don't know what you're getting into." His words confirmed what I already suspected. He knew about the illegal activities, but he had chosen to stay silent. "I'm done with your lies, Liam," I said, my voice firm. "You and your mother will have to face the consequences." For a moment, he looked as though he wanted to argue, but then he turned and walked out without another word. The raid happened 2 days later. I wasn't there to witness it, but the agents told us it went as planned. Caroline and Liam were arrested on multiple charges, including tax evasion, embezzlement, money laundering, and smuggling. But the most shocking twist came during their interrogation. Caroline had been laying the groundwork to frame me for the financial crimes. She had even falsified emails and documents in my name, creating a narrative that would have made me the perfect scapegoat. When the investigators told me this, I felt a wave of both anger and relief. Anger at her calculated cruelty, and relief that we had stopped her before she could execute her plan. As the news of their arrest spread, their once powerful empire crumbled. Their partners began distancing themselves, and the media exposed every detail of their corruption. But even as I watched their downfall, I knew this wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life and proving that I wasn't a victim. I had fought back, and for the first time in a long time, I felt in control of my story. What I didn't anticipate was how deeply their betrayal would continue to haunt me. The battle wasn't just against them. It was against the scars they had left behind. And that was a fight I would have to face alone. The arrests of Caroline and Liam sent shockwaves through their world. Their glamorous facade, the successful business, the influential connections, crumbled under the weight of their crimes. The media swarmed the case, plastering their faces across headlines. The story of their betrayal and illegal activities became the talk of Chicago. But for me, this wasn't a victory parade. It was closure. For weeks after their arrest, I was called in to provide testimony and clarify evidence. Sitting across from federal agents, recounting every detail of my experiences, felt like reliving a nightmare. But I knew it was necessary. I wanted the truth to be heard, not just for my sake, but for everyone they had wronged. The most harrowing part came during the trial. As I sat in the courtroom, Caroline and Liam avoided looking at me. Their lawyers tried to paint them as misunderstood and hard-working businesspeople, but the evidence was undeniable. Bank records, falsified documents, offshore accounts, all of it proved the extent of their crimes. The moment that hit me the hardest was when Liam took the stand. He looked like a shell of the man I had once loved, his arrogance replaced by desperation. Under cross-examination, he admitted to knowing about the illegal activities, but claimed he had been coerced by his mother. "She controls everything," he said, his voice breaking. I didn't know how to stop her. I felt a pang of pity, but it was fleeting. He had choices. He could have stood by me. Instead, he had chosen silence and complicity. The verdict was swift and damning. Caroline and Liam were found guilty on multiple charges, including fraud, tax evasion, and smuggling. Caroline received a 25-year prison sentence, while Liam was sentenced to 15 years. Watching them being led away in handcuffs was a bittersweet moment. After the trial, I felt a strange sense of emptiness. I had fought so hard for justice, and now that it was over, I wasn't sure what came next. For weeks, I stayed with Ethan, trying to process everything. One evening, as we sat in his living room, he said, "Barbara, you've done something incredible. You stood up for yourself and brought down people who thought they were untouchable. But now, it's time to think about you. What do you want for your futures?" His words stayed with me,